Welcome back to Under Oath. I got to tell you, this is so much fun because of everything you've done, from acting to radio to motivational speaking to working on the President's Council. I mean, it's just so much to talk about, but it's really your book I'm really interested in. You just wrote a book called, it's called The Pivot Principle, and it really discusses, kind of internal conflict and how we deal with it.
Exactly. How to find joy in despair. And it's I didn't really even realize when I wrote it, but it was subconscious, I guess, that it's not just about finding joy. It's about finding joy in the midst of despair, what we can learn from it and not to be afraid of it.
Now, when we write, I write comic books, which is a whole different animal than what you're doing. And how do you do you outline? Do you just go, okay, I'm just going to start. I know where my ending is. I mean, if you're giving advice to somebody else who wants to write, what method do you use?
Well, what I did, what this book is I went through a really interesting, difficult time that I call my gap years. Usually a student takes a gap year, but these were my gap years. I was myopically focused on my career and then raising my daughter as a single mom, and suddenly I'm alone. My daughter's individualizing. I'm alone on my ranch, and then we throw COVID in the midst of it, and I was kind of in this echo chamber of my own subconscious, which is kind of a strange place to be. And I discovered that some new trauma that happened to me triggered old trauma. And I went into panic attacks and anxiety attacks. And I really became curious. And I think that curious is the cousin of humility, because it's really through humility that our destiny, our genius is generated. By genius, I mean our destiny. So I had to decide in the middle of this, am I going to, destruct, or am I going to reconstruct myself and reach my hand up out of this despair? And I really didn't think I'd feel joy again, and I was really confused about what was happening. But I sought, to learn, and it's in the process when I was, sorry about that siren, I'm in New York City, but when I was in the middle of despair, I just picked up the pen and started to write. So my book is unique in that it has poetry, despairing poetry, really, it's very cathartic for the reader too. It's like, oh, I can relate, And then I have logic, which is these are my pivot principles, which are regular writing. And then after that, I have joyous poems. So it's kind of how I evolved, and I want to share that because I think we're hemorrhaging hope in this country, and there's a lot of depression. So I thought, well, I survived this, so why don't I help others?
I'm from the walk it off generation. I was in the Army. I was taught to hold this stuff back. It sounds like, this is like a glass that you're filling up. And if you don't empty it once in a while, it's eventually going to catch you.
Right. Well, it's funny you would say that, because one of my favorite quotes, and I never pronounce his name correctly, but it's Gahil Gibran, and he says, and I'm paraphrasing, but the self-same well that is filled with your tears is also filled with your laughter. So it's like the deeper the tears go, the deeper the laughter. And, my dad was a graduate of the United States Military Academy at West Point, so he was a West Pointer, so I know all about, you don't show your emotions, though he did it. He did at times. But I don't know, it's when we're swimming in it, you either have to sink or kind of do the butterfly swim and try to get out of it. And that's what I did, because I learned through the process that when we're in the middle of panic or anxiety, that can manifest in numerous ways: fight, flight, freeze, or fawn, that the amygdala lights up. And that's this part of the emotional aspect of the brain. That's the reptilian brain, which is the part of the brain that is going to survive. And that's why it fights or flights or and a lot of times, or freezes or fawns. And when that lights up, they've proven in MRIs that the rest of the brain darkens, and the logic and the reason. So it's very important to turn the light switch back on logic. And so that's what I talk about in my book with these pivot principles, ways to find ways out of that. But also, just the passion. I think there's so much in this book about just my passion and my depth, whether it's through loneliness or love or whatever it may be, but also the joyous points too, the things I find in nature and higher power and my daughter and love and service. So it's not a morbid book. It's a book about process.
Now, you mentioned something interesting earlier on, because my daughter is in her last year of high school and she's getting ready to head off to college. And even though I only get to see her once a week, I'm feeling that, she's leaving, this is a different stage, I have to grow up now too. I mean, how did you wind up dealing with that?
Well, it's all in the book. It was a rough time. These are the gap years I'm talking about. Suddenly I was alone because I was a single mom. And I was a single mom, had its rough points, but mainly it was joyous raising her. But what I think the toughest part of being a single mom is when she went off to college and I'm alone. It's like, oh, wow, who am I now? And there were some things that happened that made me question my, I don't know, there's whatever. In the midst of all the rest of my emotional turmoil, I found it to be very lonely, really difficult. But it can be that once again, I had to make a choice. Am I going to stay in this kind of turmoil, or am I going to say, hey, this is a new phase of my life and I'm still here. God has a destiny for me. Tomorrow's a new day. Don't give up before the miracle. And now let me go out there and just stay centered in, love my daughter and be a part of her now adult life. But I can either focus on the woe and the loneliness and the sadness that phase of my life is gone, which trust me, I've shed a lot of tears about it. Or I can just say, this is a new phase, and I'm still here, so I must have a reason for being here. And now how can I be of love and service and go do some little fun things I want to do, like a Broadway show.
That's interesting because you said you're in New York. You said you were in New York, and I was like laughing because I wanted to recommend. I was there a couple weeks ago and got to saw Kim Okimbo. I forgot it's called Kim Okimbo or something. They just won the Tony Award.
Kimberly Akimbo.
Yeah, if you haven't seen that, it's a fantastic show.
I did, and it is fantastic. Yes, it is. And I've written a Broadway musical based off this wonderful woman who was the first woman actually to run for president in 1884 and 1888, Belva Lockwood. No one's heard of her, but she was a single mother as well in 1850. So it's a love story, and so it takes about 10 years to get a musical to Broadway. I'm discovering. I'm making a lot of progress. We've had 2 performances here because I'm really a Texan. I'm kind of homesick right now, but I'm going for it. And people look at me like, yeah, sure, right. You're going to get a show to Broadway. Uh-huh. And I'm like, wait, I've been in this business since I was 15 years of age. Tenacity and determination is something that I really understand. So I don't know. It may happen in about 3-5 years because you just take it out of town. We may open it in D.C. actually, and then you bring it back. So but I don't know. I might be 65 when I have my Broadway debut. God help me.
You never know. People always tell me, they say, Jeff, you seem to be doing a lot of stuff. I said, well, I choose to do it. I think a lot of people who have dreams, they confuse them with goals. Dream's a nice idea. Goal is actually something you try to move forward on. And you tell people, it's like eating an elephant in small pieces. And I've seen the things you've done in your career. And I understand that dealing with loneliness is probably the toughest thing you have to encounter.
It is. I would say it is. That has definitely been the loneliest part of, the most difficult challenge for me has been the loneliness that really I felt when my daughter went off to college. And, but I have to, on the flip side, all this work I've done, this book has 114 poems in it, and then the pivot principles and the life lessons that deal with the logic. This book really kind of deals with passion, reason, and spirit. But I wouldn't have probably written it if I hadn't been alone. I mean, because I've been alone, I've had all this time to, write a Broadway musical and write a book. And I've just, also I've learned that there's a way out of loneliness. And that's why I wrote the Pivot Principles, is to find a way out of that.
Now, a lot of people, when they encounter success, they very rarely decide this is a good time to change. And I noticed earlier on in your career, you were like, I'm unhappy with what I'm doing, even though I'm working, I'm getting paid. I need to be better at what I'm doing. And you went from California back to New York to basically, improve your skills.
I was 20. Yes, you're correct. I moved to New York City at the age of 15 to model from Texas in 1978. And then I was in Hollywood by the age of 17. And I was there in 1980 in Hollywood. And there were no good roles for women. I mean, the movies maybe, but the Katharine Hepburn days were kind of fading out. But television, it was all bikinis. You were kidnapped. And I just wasn't happy. I thought, if I can't have some work that has dignity. And so I was still managing to work. I had work. I'd been on General Hospital for a year and things of that nature, and was doing pilots. But it's still, the quality of the work wasn't what I wanted. So I moved to New York City and my agent's like, well, we're going to fire you if you move to New York City. I thought, well, but okay, go ahead. I want to find a method acting coach and, take off my nail polish and cut my hair and be, if I can't have any dignity and find some real seriousness to this craft. So I did, and I held out and did certain little roles like Steel Magnolias and Monkey Shines and things of that nature. But then I had $8 left before I booked Northern Exposure. That was another really challenging time of my life. So I thought, well, God, I was trying to do the right thing, but what's happening here? And I let go and let God. And when I was just about ready to say, all right, I'll go do something else, I got a call for Northern Exposure, and I showed up for it. I was so depressed I didn't know if I could, but I did, and thank gosh I showed up. So showing up in life is really a key, and there are quotes out there, that showing up is 80% of success. So I did. I showed up and I booked Northern Exposure, but I did make that risk because in the long run I wanted work and it was so perfect. Because at the last minute, the role I booked was exactly everything that had been, as you said, my goal. And Maggie O'Connell was strong and, flew her own airplanes, was her own landlord, killed her own deer, fixed her own tires, she did everything. So she was exactly the kind of character I'd been waiting for. It was a real gift from God.
How tough is it? Because, when you talk like that and you go, well, listen, I had money coming in and then I said, I'm going to start over. I mean, how tough is, because you always hear, we got to take the money roll, then you can take the Oscar role, and then you take the money role again. I mean, how tough is it to try to maintain a career and go, well, I have to do things that's popular, but I also want to do something that inspires me?
It's tough and it's risky. And another genre of that is that I pretty much stepped away from Hollywood to raise my daughter. I decided I wanted to raise her in Texas around family and my homeland, so to speak. So I really stepped away from that. And then when my daughter went off to college, I sort of realized the intensity of that. And I don't mean to say sacrifice in a bad way, but, in a way, it was a choice I made. So now I'm sort of climbing back again at age 60. It's a little bit different doing it at 60 than 23, but it's really not different because, or 17, shall I say. Back then it was about rejection after rejection after rejection after rejection after rejection. It was, 10 job interviews in 1 week and no, and an occasional yes. So I'm just hearing the same thing again, but I just don't let it, I just listen really to what I feel my higher power, my God is telling me for my life, and I don't let anybody blow out my flame, don't let anybody put out my flame. And I think that's something I've learned, to just keep showing up for what you feel in your heart you're supposed to do.
You just mentioned something, blowing out your flame, and I think it's worse now than it's ever been as far as the negativity about everything you try to do. Yes, you have fans, but more people want to tear you down than build you up. How do you compartmentalize that and go, well, listen, I know there are always going to be the haters, but this is what I'm doing?
I have to give all the credit to God, really. And I look about what's happening in our society, and it's one of the reasons I wrote this book. We're hemorrhaging hope. There's these god-awful things happening. I'm running over old men on bicycles and whatnot. I'm like, what is happening here? What is happening? I'm sure I'm not the only one to think this. And I've been through my own despair. And I feel that ultimately it's all about God and God giving me the strength and the guidance that I put my power, my eggs in my basket are with God, because humanity will disappoint you. And then the other kind of level of God is love. It's just if love is paramount and love and service. And so that's one of my pivot principles actually in the book that I talk about this journey. But you have to have self-love in order to give love. But we can't have self-love if we don't get love from God. So, I don't know. We're a nation of freedom of religion, and people don't have to have a God if they don't want to. But for me, my faith, and I even started a prayer group where we don't have crosstalk. It's 30 minutes on Zoom. We don't turn on the camera, and we just read a Bible verse, and we just pray out loud. And everybody prays out loud. It's so cool, I got to tell you, revolutionary. And so that's really the core of, and I think that love is really missing in our country. So if we could get back to that, maybe some things would turn around.
Now, I was in the Army. I wound up going to law school later. I wound up being licensed in 18 states. I've studied constitutional law on ugly levels. And I'm just so amazed now how we treat our rights, that we don't think we really have them. And people feel they should talk about the issues you're talking about. And I don't know when that happened. And I blame it on the internet. But I mean, how you saw the change happen? Where do you think the big change happened?
Are you talking about? Well, I have a foundation, Constituting America, and I've given over 500 speeches to students and adults about the United States Constitution. And the one thing I focus on with the students are our First Amendment rights. And one of the things that's important to note for them is that they're given to us. We're born with them. You can't vote them away. You can't take them away. They're innate, and that's our whole country is founded on that, because if government gives you your rights, then government can take them away. And and one of our programs that we speak about the Constitution, I give all these speeches, but we also speak about how to have a civic conversation. And I created this program because, this kind of inability to reason with others and have a debate, we're missing out. That enlightenment comes from duality of thought, from listening to other people and having a conversation. And if we can't have a civic conversation and listen to other people's points of view, we've lost that. I think social media has been a big part of that 24-hour news cycle. But we give the kids pro and con on big issues, whatever it may be, immigration, climate change, and say, no, let's look at this. Let's just at least listen to other people, what they have to say. And the last thing I'll say on this is humility. The one thing I've learned from what I've gone through my depression, and situational depression, I'm not a depressed person, but these kind of revisiting this resurfacing trauma and panic and anxiety, is that humility is really important. And we put out in social media, look at me, look how beautiful. And I hate it, by the way. It's in my business, so I kind of have to do it. But it's like, look at me, I'm having this wonderful time. And it's putting out this false image of what life is really like and what our expectations should be. And if we were all more humble, I think we'd be a lot happier.
I think there's a lot of truth to that. And, when I was researching you, for example, I've known your work my whole life, and it was so strange because everyone's going, well, why don't you ask this? Why don't you ask this? I said, because the things they've done is not exactly who they are, the people they were with. And how difficult is it for you to feel sometimes you're defined by the work you've done or the people you've been with in comparison to who you actually are?
Well, I knew the power of television in the industry, and that the character that you're playing, it may pigeonhole you. And that happened to me with General Hospital, because I, had to bleach my hair blonde to look like Laura, because I was the new Laura. And I was hypnotized. My character was hypnotized for years, so all I kind of went around saying is, I don't know. And then people thought that's who I was. And so I'm kind of like, no, I can do a lot more, actually. I'm a lot deeper than this character. So you can be pigeonholed and stereotyped. And that's why I'm glad when, my biggest success was with a character like Maggie O'Connell. And, gosh, people are going to think about us whatever they want to think. And we can only be the best people we can be, and try to learn from our mistakes and grow. And we just have to be confident in that. I think that's what social media is like. What do other people think of me? It really shouldn't matter. It's like, it's God, it's your family, it's yourself. And that's really, your close friends who know you. But really, it's just within yourself. We shouldn't give that power away to other people.
Well, we've got about a minute left, and I want to make sure the Pivot Principle is available at Amazon. I know it's available on Kindle, and you probably can even order it from your website, which is JanineTurner.com. Is there anything else you'd like to plug before we go?
Well, yeah, well said. Well, just, it's a pleasure to speak with you today, and to speak with your, to speak indirectly, right, with your audience. And I just, hopefully, I just want to share that there is joy in the midst of despair, and through despair we can find joy. And it's wonderful speaking with you today.
Well, thank you very much, Janine. It's been my pleasure, and hope to talk to you soon.
Yes. Look forward to next time.